Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome my listeners and viewers in the United States and all around the world. I am Vince Rocco, and it is Tuesday in New York, so let's go behind the headlines and get the real story. Today, we are talking about the National Association of Realtors commission settlement. But first, this is Talking New York Real Estate, state of our industry. And up front today, all over the place, in March of 2019, home sellers filed a class action lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors and other real estate firms, alleging that they conspired to violate antitrust laws. The lawsuit focused on NAR's commission structure and practices, including the practice of tying. Tying is where the seller's agents set the commission paid to buyer's agents when a home is listed. NAR required listing brokers to communicate an offer of compensation. Home sellers were required to pay inflated buyer broker fees. Price competition among buyer brokers was restrained. Buyer broker commissions were kept between 2.5% and 3%. Then, in March of 2024, NAR announced a $418 million settlement to resolve more than a dozen of these lawsuits, with the agreement requiring sellers' agents to no longer offer compensations or commission to buyers' agents. NAR admitted to no wrongdoing in the settlement, but said its goals were to protect consumer choices and release liability for its members. The settlement is expected to encourage innovation in our real estate industry. Also today, the policy changes agreed to by NAR leadership were reviewed and updated to eliminate and prohibit any requirement of offers of compensation on the MLS systems between listing brokers or sellers to buyers brokers or other buyer representatives. The MLS systems are to eliminate all broker compensation fields and compensation information on the MLS. The new policies also require compensation disclosures to sellers and buyers, and requires MLS participants working with the buyer to enter into a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring a home. We will discuss, and we will have all that and so much more as Talking New York gets underway on this Tuesday morning. And in the news this morning, after a weaker than expected July employment report, recession fears started spreading like wildfire. Stocks plummeted last week, with the Dow down 600 points. While the jobs data was the match that lit the fire, there were other reasons for the panic. Disappointing economic data released showed the highest level of weekly jobless claims in a year, and an eight-month low in manufacturing activity. And the Fed didn't cut rates like they were supposed to at a meeting earlier that week. There were concerns about corporate earnings and stocks, especially certain tech stocks, being overvalued. Things finally calmed down, and markets then took off the following couple of days, after weekly jobless claims came in lower than expected. So, what have we learned this past week? The stock market is ridiculously sensitive to any better than or worse than expected data. While it's normal to panic when stocks are tanking, that is not the time to start selling. Decisions made out of fear are always wrong. And flavors from around the world will converge on Times Square next month. For the first time since 2019, the Times Square Alliance will host Taste of Times Square, an outdoor food and music festival featuring over 25 restaurants with diverse cuisines. To bring side street restaurants to the heart of the bustling district, the festival will set up at the Broadway Plaza and Duffy Square between 45th and 48th Street. The event takes place on Monday, September 9th from 5 to 9 p.m. And here's a good one. Outdoor dining, as New Yorkers have come to know it, may be over. New York City restaurants with roadway and sidewalk dining setups, COVID shacks as I call them, that did not apply for the city's new program by August 3rd deadline must now remove their structures, many of which have been in place since 2020. According to the Daily News, about 2,500 restaurants, or about 15% of the roughly 13,000 restaurants that had utilized outdoor dining, have applied to keep their al fresco seating. The huge decline in participants in the program, which helped keep restaurants in business during the pandemic, comes after the city approved new guidelines to make the program seasonal. This requires restaurants to disassemble and store the structures during the winter, in addition to new fees and design requirements. And when choosing between a co-op and a condo is a significant decision for all home buyers in New York City, with each option offering unique benefits and challenges. Co-ops, where buyers purchase shares in a corporation that owns the building, often provide a more affordable and community-focused living experience, but it comes with strict board approval process. In condos, They offer full property ownership with greater flexibility in renting and selling, although they typically come at a higher cost with increased closing expenses. You should learn about the key differences among these property types in New York City to find out which best aligns with your lifestyle and financial goals. And with me at the table today are Richard Haggerty, who is the CEO of One Key MLS, Michael Holt from Compass, Klaus from Prestige Properties International, and Pierre Debbas from Romer Debbas Law.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Okay, and we're good. All right, everybody, we are back. And listen, breaking news this morning. We're talking about the NAR Commission settlement, and we're going to get all into that. But in my email this morning from Inman News, okay, Michigan real estate brokers file an antitrust suit against the National Association of Realtors. And in that lawsuit, it claims that membership requirement in NAR, their state realtor association, and a local board of realtors is an antitrust violation. They're trying to backpedal out of the settlement. In a lawsuit filed on Monday, okay, by Douglas Hardy, Glenn Champion, and Dylan Tent in U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan, the plaintiffs claim the requirements that all realtors and brokers in Michigan can be members of NAR, their state realtor association, and a local board of realtors, and it represents an antitrust violation. In the suit, plaintiffs allege that the compulsory membership in these associations is a violation of antitrust laws, as well as an example of economic coercion, unfair restraint on trade, and conspiracy. All I can say to that is, here we go again. Mm-hmm. All right, so listen, guys, if that's breaking news, you may have seen it in your emails this morning, you may not have. Adds another level of complexity to, what we're going to talk about today, or what the settlement from NAR is all about. Look, as I was saying to the guys off camera, this too shall pass. We will get beyond this. We will figure it out. We have to be patient. It's not like we've never had regulations or changes in our industry before. I'm in this business 22 years. We've had more changes than I care to even remember. We will work through it. But Richard, let me start with you, okay? Can you share your thoughts? You work at One Key MLS, huge real estate application. Share your thoughts on this settlement on broker commissions, just in an overall picture for us, and then we're going to kind of break it down with everybody.
Sure, thanks, Vince. First off, I think that the National Association of Realtors doesn't get enough credit for the settlement they negotiated. You go back to the verdict in the Sitzer-Burnett case, and it was ballpark 1.7, 1.8 billion, mm-hmm. because it was an antitrust case, mm-hmm. treble damages, so you multiply that by 3, so it took it over $5 billion, 5.3 thereabouts. And it wasn't just that case, it was all of the copycat cases that launched right after it.
That is still ongoing, by the way.
Well, some of them are ongoing, but some of them actually were resolved because of the settlement. In fact, most of the seller-based lawsuits, copycat lawsuits, were resolved once the settlement is actually approved, because that approval has not happened yet. So when you look at the scope of what they achieved, $412 million is a lot of money over 4 years, but it still is a lot less, and it's covering numerous lawsuits. And it's also protecting millions of agents, 1-point-something million agents. There are some caveats to that. Any agent or firm that in 2022 had over $2 billion worth of residential transaction volume were excluded. I think every firm now that falls in that category, for the most part, have reached their own settlements. But I think what NAR achieved really is, from my perspective, very important. And it really provided surety where we could still have all this confusion continuing. So if you look at the dollar amount, they deserve a lot of credit.
I agree with you, because I do remember seeing some of those larger numbers. But there are people out there, there are agents out there, whether they're members of NAR or not, that say, they caved, they gave in, they should have fought harder, and maybe they could have erased it completely. Thoughts on that?
So my thoughts on that is you have to look at what antitrust attorneys make per hour.
Well, there you go.
It would have been tremendously expensive to fight, not just to take that Sitzer Burnett case on appeal, and also to defend against all those copycat lawsuits. So from the financial aspect, I think NAR did a great job. I do have some concerns about some of the other issues that were addressed in the settlement. You mentioned already the fact that compensation now has to come out of the MLS. The deadline is August 17th.
Yeah.
We proactively removed compensation from our MLS last Thursday, August 8th.
On August 8th, correct.
From my perspective, and this is my perspective only, we always have to be focused on the consumer. The consumer has and always should have the right to choose. Mm-hmm. Now, a seller, if they feel that given market conditions, they want to provide some type of communication, broad communication, saying I'm willing to offer compensation to buyer agents, they can't do it through the MLS anymore. And I think that's taking away consumer choice from sellers. And that aspect, I think NAR probably tried to do the best they could. I think, quite frankly, compensation should have been voluntary. We had already changed our rules to allow for zero for compensation. So if the seller didn't want to offer it, they didn't have to. Again, total consumer choice.
So you are the CEO of One Key MLS, okay? So how has your company and you been working to ensure a smooth transition or a smoother transition for us agents in complying with these new rules and regulations? You just touched on a couple of them. You've been updating your system, removing, compensation elements. But what else? Because the fear out there, we don't, here in New York City, as you know, we don't use MLS, okay? And you've been on my show many times in the past, and we've talked about why doesn't, New York City use MLS, and everybody should, but we don't. But the fear out there is because of that, and as you mentioned before, the copycat, lawsuits and scenarios, agents here feel like, well, we're not part of the MLS. We have our own proprietary systems. Our commissions have always been stated in our listings. Why can't that continue? What are you doing to ensure, from an MLS perspective, that all of these changes are happening and that the professionals out there who subscribe to or use MLS will be okay? Because right now I think people are fearful of the unknown, and we all know what the unknown represents to anybody, right? Whether it's personal, whether it's business, the unknown is fearful.
Yep. Change is always tough. And here's the bottom line. We can only do so much, and we have been doing a lot of information and education. It's constant, it's ongoing, and it will continue to be ongoing. But if there's one thing I think that is going to come about that, again, I think could be pro-consumer, is agents are going to have to take it upon themselves to deliver, to hone their own value proposition. And I think that's going to be more important than ever, and the MLS can't do that for the agent.
We're going to ask the experts in a minute on that. You're right.
We can provide all types of tools.
You're right.
But the value proposition, the agents have to take, the offices and agents have to take responsibility for. And we can help reinforce that, again, through information, through data. But the bottom line is that's going to be the dynamic that I see shifting, and that's why education at every single level, both at the broker level, at the association level, and franchise level, if the firm is part of a franchise, and at the MLS level. Just reinforced education as to what the options are, how to deliver the information, but at the end of the day, it falls on the individual agent, and education is going to be more important than it ever has.
Richard, that is so spot on. I 1,000% agree. I'm writing a course where I teach continuing education for real estate agents, in the business 2+ years. And I'm writing a course, and hopefully the state will accept it, and we can add it to our program at New York Real Estate Institute on just how to negotiate. I was on a panel last week talking about this same issue here, the NAR settlement, and one of the things I said to the agents out there who, again, panicking, unknown, don't know what's happening, is it's going to come down, just like you said, to us individually as agents. We have to learn how to better negotiate. Every conversation I've had with sellers since probably February, March of this year, and even buyers, has been drastically different than ever before. And we're in New York City, like I said, not MLS users. Every conversation, I've lost a couple of buyers, I've lost a couple of sellers, because what do they say? I'm not paying commission because I don't have to. Okay. You're never going to change that mindset. So we have to learn how to better negotiate, communicate to our buyers and our sellers why they need to continue doing, what they've always done, And we'll get into that, in a minute with the agents here. But Pierre, I wanted to ask you, because you wrote a piece, and I believe an op-ed on 10 points, okay, with regard to this settlement and what it means or what agents should really, kind of get out of it. One of them, effective date, we all know, October 17th. Offers of compensation, steering, cap on commissions, whatever. Tell us about this.
I think, one of the most important things is the marketability. How can you market a property? Clearly, if a seller is willing to pay a buyer's broker's commission and the buyer doesn't have to worry about the anxiety of having that 3% expense added to the long laundry list of closing costs they already have, that enhances the marketability. But it's how you say things now, right? Like the whole settlement terms want to make sure that you are not steering buyers towards certain listings for your own self-serving benefit. Now, in terms of marketing a property, and it's a play on words, and I always say the great saying in life, there's a million ways to skin a cat. This is kind of a prime example of that. Now, if you're a listing agent, you're going to advise the seller, let me backtrack actually. You cannot say, hey, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, you're not allowed to, if you do not say you will pay a buyer's broker's commission, that it's going to reduce the foot traffic that you get in here. It's going to hurt the marketability, and buyers brokers are not going to bring buyers to your listing. You can't say that. You cannot say it in a definitive manner that this will result in negative activity for
and
your
property.
property.
Want to just interrupt you for a minute. I have already heard that from agents out there. You're right. We cannot say that.
Cannot say it, although
but
it's
I'm
true.
hearing it. It's true, but I'm hearing it, and I wonder where that's going to land eventually. But I'm sorry to cut you off.
So the way to phrase it is that it will help the marketability of a property if you're willing to pay certain expenses that are traditionally buyers' expenses. If you're willing to provide concessions to pick up buyers' costs, such as a buyer's broker's commission. That you can say. So if you notice, it's a play on words. The first one is, you will suffer detriment if you don't do this. That's illegal. The second one is, hey, you will enhance the marketability if you do this. That's a positive. That's legal. So that's really one of the most important things to take away from this is that, again, a bottom line between the five of us here, it's the same thing, right? The end results, the net result's the same. It's the way now you're saying it, and this is all from a liability perspective. So the latter comment I made has to be applied across the board.
And what about listing agreements? How have they changed? Here at Brown Harris Stevens, they've changed significantly, where you have a section to talk about the seller's agent compensation, and then another section talking about the buyer's compensation. So what else has changed in that listing agreement other than those two sections?
So all the companies are redrafting all their agreements now. Buyers, brokers agreements, listing agreements, amendments to buyers, brokers agreements. The most important thing is transparency. Having it in bold writing that commissions are negotiable. You are not forced to pay X amount of dollars or X percentage price. That's the biggest takeaway in terms of listing agreements. It has to be transparent that they are negotiable.
And also communicated properly when you're sitting in front of a seller. Now, last week I read something or came across on my email where Rebney is saying, Real Estate Board of New York, hold it, just hold it. We're not part of NAR. We are, governed, you all are governed by Rebney. We have not yet made a final determination on how the RLS is going to send out information to all the listing systems, the proprietary systems that are out there, right? So different than NAR. So that's, and I think if I remember correctly, I read that we can continue doing post August 17th. We can still put commissions out there. We can still put anything, that we've ever put before on our, listings that go out to the community until further notice. And they didn't define what further notice is. Do you have any update on that?
Sure. So at the moment, you can, on your Brown Harris website, you can advertise the commission sellers want to pay. That's permissible.
Right.
You can't put it in any MLS. That's not permissible.
No. Well, we don't use that. We don't send our stuff to MLS anyway. But
so
yes,
for the time being, it's business as usual because Rebney hasn't really given guidance in terms of their interpretation of this moving forward.
Right.
But for the moment, that's business as usual.
How long do you think? How long do you think it's going to take for Rebney to kind of get their act together and come up with? I know we all have the same reaction to come up with a lay of the land. How are we going to do this going forward?
I was just
shouldn't be that difficult.
I was speaking with them this month. I can't imagine it's not going to be. You're not going to have some guidance by September, mid-September, end of September.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I can't imagine the guidance. Like I'm basing all of my advice off of the, the provisions NAR's thrown out there. I can't imagine it's going to be much different than that. But I do think in the next within the next month we should have guidance from them.
Michael, welcome. You're an agent here in New York City. Okay, successful agent, been doing this for a while. What are your thoughts from an agent perspective? And we'll talk a little bit about your interactions with buyers, with sellers these days, how they may have changed, how they've not. But just as an agent, what are the first thoughts that come to mind with, here we go again, another requirement, another regulation, another change. I don't know that I'm ready for this.
Yeah, well, first of all, Vince, thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure. Life always throws you curveballs, right? Life is always going to give you change. It's how you adjust and overcome those challenges. There's also going to be silver linings along the way. But all in all, just to get specific on this certain situation, it's a matter of first, like you were saying in the beginning, right? You have to be able to, sure, the negotiation, the conversation changes. I think it's a mix of education and negotiation, because the sellers and buyers both have to be aware of like what's going on. Like, what is the lay of the land? What are my options? What are my choices? What is the norm? How is it being played still? But as Pierre was saying, like, in the end of the day, it comes down to two things. It comes down to what is the seller's net number, okay? And it comes down to what is the buyer willing to pay? That's it. The only thing that changed, in my opinion, is the formalities of things. That's what really changed. Because, look, I can't imagine a buyer from any type of price range, financing speaking wise, are going to want to pay a buyer's commission, because that's why they're financing. They're trying to leverage as much money as they can possible. The seller is a net number, right? So you know that buyer is going to come in and they're going to want to negotiate that, hey, seller, you're going to pay the commission directly to my buyer. Like, that's going to be part of the offer when we submit it, right? And then we'll have them sign a commission agreement. Like, that is, if I was a buyer and I'm telling my clients, and that's what their mentality is they want the seller to pay that commission. And it'll eventually come out of that net number, right? So I think it's just it's from formalities that have changed. The silver lining actually was so interesting, because before really things caught wind and really just started to be like, oh, wow moment, like, what's going on here? I was involved in a situation with a brokerage outside of Rebney. And so they weren't bound to our, at the time, co-universal what is it? It's the brokerage, universal
co-broke, yes.
Did I say that 5 times? Twice, yeah, 5 times in a row. So anyways, the thing is, though, is that they technically didn't have to split their commission with me. So I wanted to make sure, I'm like, hey, like, here's the offer. Just want to make sure, split any commission, blah, blah, blah. So accepted offer, have things in writing. And apparently he was telling me, he's like, listen, your commission is going to be, I think at the time it was like, it's going to be 2.5%. But listen, I have a special agreement with the seller, and he was going to make, I think it was like close to 4. And I was like, wow. I said, hey, you know what? God bless. I'm happy with 2.5%. It's what the seller agreed for. So I was kind of experiencing the situation at hand back then. Well, what was interesting was when it came down to it, this was all in the deal sheet as well, by the way, okay? When it came down to like contract signing and confirmation, like, we're under contract now. Seller goes, wait a minute. I didn't agree to pay this much in total commission. Where's that in writing? And so I'm like, well, hey, it's in the deal sheets and your broker's email. And seller's like, well, I didn't sign anything. I'm not paying that commission. I said, you got to be kidding me. So I'm just like, oh my gosh. You know what it came down to? It came down to what was in the listing agreement. And it was actually paying me 3% and the selling agent 3%. So there's a total of 6, right? And that's the way it ended up going down. It wasn't anything else. So just to fast forward where we are today, what I think is a silver lining is that it's going to be crystal clear who's paying what and how much, right? So I think that is the silver lining there, is that you're going to have, there's not going to be those type of instances where all of a sudden you're wondering like, oh, wow, am I being paid a commission and how much and by whom? So I think that does help. I do think that in the end, it's still going to go down for the sellers paying it. I think you're going to have your biggest challenges when the markets are super hot and very competitive. And I also think that if it's a cash buyer, then it's just, it's not as much as pertinent as the seller paying as when there's financing, right? Because in the end, it's all cash. So
it's all cash. All right, we got to take a quick break. We're not going anywhere. We've got so much more to talk about. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the Moore Network. Don't go anywhere.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Richard, you wanted to make a comment on what Michael was just saying?
Yeah, Michael, I think you were so on point, and it really, I think, is part of what the NAR settlement also stipulates, which is you now have to have written buyer agreements. So if you're going to intend to collect any compensation or the potential of collecting compensation from the buyer, you have to have a written agreement. And prior to the settlement, quite frankly, the cooperating broker, especially buyer agents, were at the mercy of whatever was going to be offered as compensation. And now you have a degree of control over your compensation as a buyer agent through your written agreement. And I couldn't agree with you more. What the seller needs to focus on and what the listing broker needs to help the seller focus on is their net. That's the bottom line.
That's it.
Not who's paying what, is what are they going to net out. But having a clear
And that's always been a
buyer-broker
conversation
agreement,
with sellers anyway.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Having a clear buyer-broker agreement that delivers that value proposition in writing where you're able to say,
Yeah.
these are all the things I'm going to do, I think your example is just dead on.
And to that point, one of the things I neglected to mention to Pierre when I was talking about REBNY not making a formal change to the policy here, REBNY is also saying that we don't have to have buyer agreements signed right now. That's part of what the delay is, okay? So we can continue to, in New York City, we can continue to do business as usual without a buyer agreement. We will get to that once they make their final declaration as to how we're going to proceed and go forward. But right now they're saying we can proceed post-August 17th as usual. Kyle, let me ask you. Kyle runs an international company based in our Gold Coast, 6th borough, the Gold Coast of New Jersey, and here in New York City and elsewhere. Let me ask you, because your firm, your agents work primarily off of an MLS system. What is the feeling that they have right now with removing commission data, removing lots of other things, and yet what kind of conversations are they having with sellers and buyers? Are they becoming more difficult? What's happening in MLS world?
Yeah, in MLS world, I think it's like Pierre said, it's really just going back to the two main drivers are like communication and clarity. So it's just having those upfront communications and conversations with people and just laying it all out on the table. Like you mentioned, it's not directing them to do a certain thing. It's basically, it's really just, it's taking it away from the MLS.
But do you think that their conversations are changing with sellers? Like, in other words, you feel like agents are going to be directing the conversation to, well, you still have to pay 3% to the buyer agent, you still have to pay 3% to the seller's agent, or are they just kind of going with, okay, so your call, what do you want to do?
No, absolutely not. And the fact is that buyer's agent's compensation was never mandatory. It was always
right
up for negotiation.
It was always a given.
Yeah,
it was always
and,
a given.
Like one of the things we're mentioning now to sellers is like, look, you have different options. It's almost like the pricing options of like, here we can price it at the top of the market, the middle, or under to get a bidding war. It's the same kind of conversation, just in regards to compensation of, look, we can offer no compensation. We never had to. We could offer a compensation. Do you remember buying your property when you were a buyer and you had to pay closing costs, you had to pay moving costs, you had to pay attorney's fees, like all this stuff?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and it's just about that. And really it just comes down to the net number, like we were talking about. But the conversation is just more clear up front, and it's, we can take it as it comes. It's like going into a store, a department store, and you see this luxury brand and this luxury brand, but this luxury brand is 30% off. It's kind of like, which are the buyers going to go towards which product?
Well, and getting back to what Pierre said a little while ago, we cannot legally say, if you don't give a buyer's broker a commission, they're not going to show your property and no one's going to come and blah, blah, blah. That's true. Mm-hmm. But reality says, okay, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, you ain't going to get showings and you're not going to get visitation because no one's going to come and show your property, period. What do you do with that? How do you explain that, right? You have to explain that somehow, because I had that situation and I'm like keeping my mouth shut, but I'm like, and he said to me, well, so how do you think this is going to affect visitation? I said, it's going to. And that's all I said.
Right.
It's going to. Yeah. And he still said, I'm not paying a buyer's broker. I said, okay, I'm not the agent for you. Bye.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me as a broker to educate my agents to make a certain statement and not just leave it open for them. So to be more so, I would say mention something like, look, if you are hard pressed about not paying a buyer's agent commission, we're gonna field offers. We're gonna see how the action is. We can, just like a price adjustment, we can negotiate that in 2 weeks' time. In a week's time. So that's kind of how we're handling it.
Pierre, I wanted to ask you too, based on that comment. So, you're a very successful law firm dealing with lots of clients every day, every week, whatever. What are you seeing as far as like the purchase prices? Are sellers increasing purchase prices now based on what may be coming down the road, having to pay a buyer broker when they technically never had to, but they always did? Mm-hmm. Okay, surprise, surprise. Do you see anything changing on the price side of listings?
At the moment, no, nothing's changing, because I think a lot of this is that the consumer's not fully up to speed and aware that this has gone into effect. So I think in the next 6 months we're going to have a huge transition in our marketplace. I think to your point, market conditions in a seller's market, they may get cute and say, hey, I got enough demand coming to my property without having to offer this concession. I'm not going to do it. I think that we'll really know the answer to that 6 months from now. But so far, every buyer or seller I've spoken to, none of them are really, think twice about this. It hasn't been a topic of conversation.
Michael, so, the Street Easy effect, as I've been calling it for, 15 years or whatever. Everybody's on Street Easy. Everybody loves Street Easy. How is that going to affect the buyer agent pool out there when we already have a struggle with Street Easy, when buyers can go out there and search on their own? Is that going to increase? Is that going to knock out a buyer's broker completely? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Zillow Group, they have a showing agreement. I'm not sure how you guys are aware of this. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily make someone like, oh, we have an exclusive buyer representation. I mean, here's the thing. What's going to come down to is your value proposition as an agent. And they have to deal with people that they've never met in their entire lives. This isn't a referral or somebody that was introduced by a friend or another professional outside of the state in a different area. No, this is someone you don't know, and they have to like you and want to work with you and believe in your skills as an agent and your value proposition. I was just going to want to rewind, and this kind of proves my point here, because if you look back before all this was happening in place, didn't you get calls from people, or every now and then you run into somebody that just says, hey, you know what? I don't want to work with a buyer's agent because I want to negotiate myself. I think that there's an additional 3% that I'm going to save here.
Correct.
Like, how many times have you heard that before?
Always.
It's the same thing. Like, people, it's like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to use a buyer's broker? Well, you never did in the past anyways. And people still had that same mentality that they're going to go save 3%. And so that value proposition, those types of objectives and challenges as buying agents, like, they've always been there. The thing is the conversation and the value proposition is happening earlier, right? But when you meet somebody, you don't just go, hey, nice to meet you. Oh, by the way, this is what I charge, and if you don't want to work with me, it's like, no, like, we're going to meet, we're going to consult, we're going to find out what's your motivations in wanting to buy, what are your pain points, and how I might be able to service and help. And you go down the line, and then you get to the buyer's compensation and how everything is structured and how everything works. But what's interesting is that in the end, if that seller's giving you a hard time, they're like, absolutely not, like, I'm refusing, I'm not going to pay. Well, here's the thing. Majority of all the transactions have buying agents. How many deals are you seeing across your desk that don't have a buying agent attached to it?
Good question.
The
Good
vast
question.
majority
Good
have
question.
them. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a damn good reason for it. And so here's the thing. If you
In
know,
this town anyway, there's a very good reason for it. You're right.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, I can tell you also about Florida. My gosh, like, agents do contracts work there. We don't have, like,
Correct.
I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm used to
Right.
attorneys,
I don't
like,
exist
dude,
in
help
most
me.
of the
Yeah,
country.
it's
I
like,
agree.
It's different.
I
There's
agree.
a lot of liability there. But so the thing is this, it's that, okay, if I'm a seller and I realize that the majority of my buying pool is going to have agents, then I know, and majority of transactions are financed, then I know that this guy's going to want me to pay his agent, right? So I need to have the conversation with my seller's broker to realize, okay, it's about my net number after all. I need to anticipate that they're going to want me to pay their commission, right? So I need to build that in to whatever my net number is going to be. But what dictates the price of the market does. It's how are things trading? How is the market right now? Is it buyer's market, seller's market? Is it neutral? Where is it heading, right? So in the end, it comes down to a net number that they're going to be happy with. Sure, I mean, I would like to sell my place for $50 million too. But in the end, it's going to be relative to what everybody else is selling, and they're going to be building in those commissions as well.
And isn't that a conversation that we love to have with our sellers when they think they have gold in their walls, right? I should get $100,000 more because I did this and I did that. Okay, really?
Yeah, the golden toilets are my favorite.
The golden toilets. Well, you know what? Nobody wants it, so take it with you.
And Vince, think about the extra work a listing broker has to engage in if they're working with an unrepresented buyer.
Correct.
I mean, that's a tremendous amount of hours and work and walking that fine line to make sure that you're not deviating from advocating for your seller client. And I think there's got to be some conversation with your seller client about what compensation you should deserve if you're working with an unrepresented buyer, because you're doing a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. You're doing double the work in a lot of cases, especially here in New York City with co-ops and condos and co-op boards and applications and the purchase process. It's unbelievable.
Sorry to jump in here. You make a great point, and honestly, it's all something we've been dealing with, right? But now it's clearly itemized, like, okay, if a buyer comes in without a buyer's broker, this is what you would pay. So it's very, very clear. Back in the day, maybe not as much, but still people always are like, oh, hey, if they don't have a buyer's broker, will you reduce your commission? Like, that conversation did happen, but here's the thing.
Absolutely.
It's more than that. The buyers themselves have their emotions, like, oh, should I go forward with this? Or I'm thinking about something else, or maybe this is a concern of mine. Like, we have to do now a buying agent's job, which is getting paid how much on average? 2.5%, 3%. So technically speaking, I'll take my full commission as a seller's agent. I should. I mean, I'm not having to go now and show the buyer a bunch of places, but still, like, it is not just my duty to, my fiduciary to represent my seller in their own best interest. Like, sure, that's a given, but now I'm having to do a lot of extra work and wearing multiple hats as a therapist and all these other things to the buyer just to get them
bartender
to the table. Like, it'd be better to work with a professional, and not to mention to negotiate as well. But I don't want to ramble on there. But good.
No. You're right. But Richard, let me ask you first of all, before I ask you the buyer agreement question. Are there stats? I'm not that familiar with MLS because we don't use it here. But are there stats that come out of the MLS system that say consumer is 50%, broker is another 50%, or any number, or any mix? Do we know how many consumers are looking at MLS versus how many brokers or agents are looking at MLS?
I can tell you that our consumer-facing website has heavy traffic.
Okay.
And
so just like Street Easy, they're searching on their own?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, we don't have the deep pocketbooks that Zillow has or Homes.com has. Homes.com is engaging in a massive advertising effort right now. But we do feel that it's good to have choice, and it's good for those leads to flow back to the brokerage community directly with no strings attached. So we firmly believe in a consumer-facing website really creating choice in the marketplace. I do want to emphasize that it's not just the lawsuit. We have this other little entity called the Department of Justice that we
Can't
have
forget
to
them.
Be very aware that they have their own agenda, and they're not coming out and just advertising what that agenda is. It's more of a cat and mouse game.
Didn't they first not want to deal with this lawsuit and then coming back into the mix? Is that what I read recently? I'm not quite sure.
I'm going to defer to Pierre, but it seems as though every lawsuit where NAR has taken a position, the DOJ has now taken the opposite position.
Right.
They've
Thank
come
you. Better
out
said.
with
That's what I meant.
filings that are clearly. One thing that I'm a big believer in is if you participate in MLS, you should put your listings in the MLS. And I firmly believe that because I think it's pro-consumer.
Yeah.
If consumers have to go searching through multiple websites, that's not going to benefit the consumer. For the DOJ to come out and say they feel that that's anti-competitive, I don't see where they're coming from with that position. And I think we have to have an honest, open conversation about that. I think the other thing that we need to do, and Pierre and I were talking about this off camera, is we have to start to control our own narrative as to the value we bring to the consumer in the transaction.
Absolutely.
Right now, it's being controlled by folks who are anti-agent, from my perspective. And we can't lose that argument. And every day, the headlines come out, consumers feel this, consumers feel that, and we've got to get in front of that narrative.
Well, and like I say all the time, the press, and the word on the street, especially here in New York City, it spreads like wildfire, as I mentioned in the opening. Look, people are going to latch onto something that make them feel comfortable or latch onto something that's going to save them money. I've said for 22 years that I'm in this business, unlike probably any other industry, everybody's always got their hands in our pocket. Everybody always wants to take money away from the agent. I don't understand it. I will never accept it, but it's a fact, okay?
Yes.
So, but this is what drives the consumer out there, at least in New York City, okay, where I don't want to pay commission, or I don't want to pay 6% or 5%. I mean, in going back a couple of years, just a normal conversation with the seller was, in some cases, could be dramatic. Why do you want to charge 6%? Why do you want to charge 5%? Because it is what it is. I mean, just to simplify it. But we've always struggled with that. All right, we've got to take another break. We're coming right back. Quick break. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. Don't go anywhere. We are back. Okay, so I want to talk about in this segment the buyer's broker the buyer's agent agreement. Look, anytime you ask, in my opinion, okay, anytime in the past I've asked, a buyer to sign something that ties them exclusively to me as their buyer's, broker, they were like, no, I'm not doing that. The thought of contract. What if I want to cheat on you? What if I want to do whatever? Okay, which they always do, by the way. So, Pierre, our legal guru here, a buyer's agreement says what, and how effective is this going to really be in the new way that we conduct real estate transactions?
So a buyer's agreement is a contract. That's what's intimidating about it. And we're going to go through a transition in the market where the consumer is going to say, oh my God, I'm signing a contract. What does this mean? I'm committed to paying you this, hoping that the seller agrees to pay it. So that's the bottom line. Now, the important thing about this contract, there's a number of ways to structure it in terms of the term of the contract. You can't play with the commission. The commission has to be transparent. Whatever's in there, that's the cap that you are going to get. Now, what you can alter is that if I want to work with, Mike, we're looking at one property down 1 Wall Street. I'm like, I only want to use you to look at properties at 1 Wall Street, and we're going to have this agreement for 4 weeks and see how you do. I can do that, and then I can go work with Vince on looking at a place on the Upper West Side, and maybe I have it open-ended to, well, I'll work with Vince with every other building in New York City except 1 Wall Street because I have an agreement with Mike. So there is flexibility in that regard. We can have an agreement as short as a day. Like, hey, look, you sang a good song, you're impressive, I'll give you a day to make a deal happen. Or you can have it where it's like an exclusive agreement, like a listing, where it's 120 days where I'm only committing to working with you. So that part where you're like, okay, I'm concerned that I'm marrying myself to you and I can't cheat on you during the course of this agreement, you can alter it to hedge against the consumer's fear, where you can limit it to shorter durations of time, specific properties, and that's going to help the conversation.
All right, so Kyle, let me ask you a question. So at the end of the day, okay, say a seller does not want to pay commission, and one of your agents, puts together one of these, buyer agreements to sign. In that agreement, are any buyers, in your opinion, going to agree to pay a commission?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean,
a buyer's commission of, say, all right, you say absolutely. What percentage?
Well, here's the thing, and we're training our agents to negotiate on their behalf right up front with the buyers, and to let them know that most of the time this may come from the sellers, but put in there what you deem is a good commission for yourselves. Like, for instance, we have some agents that are, it's harder, it's not easy, but putting in 3%. This is my commission. Now, at the end of the day, if the seller's only paying out 2.5%, they'll get the extra 0.5%, or have to negotiate it, or it's still gonna.
Well, here's my problem, okay, and this is Vince Rocco, real estate agent speaking, okay, and not for them, but for me. I mean, if buyer says, all right, I'll agree to pay you 1% commission, I now have the decision to make. Do I want to work in a co-op or a condo at 1%? Vince Rocco says, hell no.
No, I wouldn't either.
Hell no. I don't even know if I want to do it for 2%.
That's up to the agent, and what I'm telling my agents right now.
And by the way, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, sure. I don't even know that my company's going to accept that.
No.
Okay? No, and so here's the problem. The company's going to sit back and say, no, we can't accept that. Now what? You want them to go out on their own, right?
That's their decision to make. That's their decision to make. We are having different we have about 3 or 4 different forms we're going to go over. We have a training session tomorrow with all the agents, but one-off showing properties, 1 day showing properties, this amount of time. And Mike, we are, like you were saying, Zillow does have their own agreement, which is just like a set 7-day showing agreement. But we have those. We're basically copying off of that for rentals also. We have to get that in place.
Pierre, forgive me, but you might have said this, but do the buyer's agreements have to have the commission in there that the buyer is going to pay the agent, or can it be a showing agreement or anything else? I mean, does it have to have that?
It has to say that the buyer agrees. If the seller does not pay commission, the buyer agrees to pay you X.
Oh my goodness!
It has to be in there.
I'm sorry, not to be a naysayer, ain't gonna work.
And you can always take less. You can never take more. So if you're in a negotiation and you're like, okay, the delta is 1%, you can decide to reduce the commission to make the numbers work. And one thing I would like to emphasize is that buyers have a fixed amount of dollars they have to spend, right? So while your initial reaction may be, this is never going to work, in reality, if the seller's saying, I'm not paying it, then the buyer's just reducing their offer.
Right.
The question is going to be, like Mike alluded to, in a aggressive market, in a seller's market, how's that going to play out? Minus a very robust seller's market, it's really going to be, okay, fine, if you're not paying it, I'm just offering X amount less. The only negative offering X amount less is that number, if you're paying the commission, that's not a financeable charge. Where if it was looped into the price, buyers finance generally 80% of the price in New York, it's less money out of pocket. But at the end of the day, consumer has X amount of dollars to spend.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does come back to choice. And we've talked about value proposition, and both on the listing agreement as well as the buyer-broker agreement, it states in bold language, commissions are negotiable. So everybody, both consumers and agents, get to have choice. You get to have choice as to what you are going to charge for your fees.
Yeah.
The consumer gets to have choice as to what they're willing to, pay out. And I think that's the important thing. There is no set commission. There's got to be choice. You're providing your firm with choice. Your agents, you're giving your agents a certain amount of latitude as what they can do being licensees with your firm. And I think that's great. I think that's pro-consumer.
But I think, though, yes, you're correct. But I think, though, at least in some of the larger firms here in New York City, we're going to have to wait for our companies to give us guidance on what they will accept and what they won't accept. Sure. Like I said before, I might even agree to 1%, 1.5%, 2%. But if the company comes back and says, well, okay, so I don't think that's going to work, because as it is in normal days, okay, we would have a struggle sometimes getting a 5% overall commission approved by managers in most of these larger companies. God forbid it was less than that. So I don't know how this is all going to be affected, here. I think you all said it before. I think it comes down to major communication skills and learning how to renegotiate. But what I continue to think, though, is sellers are going to want to maybe increase prices, and this is what I'm hearing out there, feet on the street. Sellers are going to want to increase prices if they have to pay a buyer's commission now. A buyer might say, well, if I have to pay you, Vince Rocco, my buyer's agent, a commission, I want a price decrease or some kind of compensation off, and the seller might say, no. But that's typical negotiation anyway, right?
Typical. And then remember, it's a net price for seller, most buyers willing to pay. That's what makes up our current market today and always has, right? And in the end, it's in comparison to what everybody else is doing. Like, how do other buyers are valuing the same priced asset? Now, it's similar, like the sellers have to adjust accordingly. But here's the thing, like, let's not forget, though, as buying agents, when you got new development deals, sometimes the sponsor pays 4%.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
And if you have 3 in your, but there is a amendment that you can make, right? It's you can amend that contract. Here's the thing, though. This is one of my favorite things that I tell people all the time. I tell them this. I was like, look, when you're hiring the best, it's expensive. But if you have bad representation, it costs you a fortune. So that is one of my favorite things I say, because it is so true.
Very true.
I had a guy, very astute, very well educated, coming from California, doesn't know the laws and everything here, soft market. He chose to hire me. Great. Now we go to make an offer on a place that's been sitting for a while. I know what the numbers are, I know what the comps are, I know how the market is. It's been sitting forever, needs renovations, in a co-op, like just all these things. So when it came down to the offer strategy that I implemented in the value analysis that I gave him, in the end, what he was willing to pay versus the deal that I got him, and look, not every deal is like this, but I saved him over $100,000 that he was willing to pay.
Yeah.
The deal I had was more than 10% below that I had gotten. the thing is,
We have lots of value, Michael.
but that's just negotiating. There's a lot of other things we could
right,
have offer too.
right.
But just on a dollar perspective, because people can be very short-sighted. They think about, okay, how much, what's the money? So he would have paid. I saved him $100,000. I didn't ask for more commission. Like, I didn't say, hey, no. I'm happy to do so. It's what I do. But that's just one of the value components that we offer as agents. The interesting thing is right, as Pierre was mentioning, we were talking about earlier, yes, in hot markets, it can become very challenging. But we've also experienced this in Florida, right? Like, Florida's just been on a tear since COVID, right? So now the market's starting to soften. But my point is that you'll have buyers that'll be like, hey, where's the inventory? I don't see it on Zillow. Are you seeing anything? Do you have access to off-market or upcoming listings? Or do you know, like, who might be selling? Do you know a big seller agents in the area that might have some inventory that are working on leads or have no sellers with a make-me-move price, right? Or perhaps I want to make sure.
Price. I like that.
I want to make sure that I don't overpay by so much. I remember in hot markets even here, I would have buyers look me dead in the eyes and be like, how long until I have to hold this to get my money back? Am I going to lose? Like, oh my God, but I really need a place. But it's not only that, it's especially so. It's like, what else are they getting into? Like, what are the terms? Like, what is this contract going to say? Especially in Florida, because we're very, very, very blessed in New York that legally speaking, like, every transactions we have to go through as an attorney. Oh my gosh. But in Florida, you got to do all this stuff yourself. You have a boilerplate contract.
No, I'll take an attorney any day.
My
No,
gosh,
I do not
right.
want to deal with that stuff. I have enough to do. I don't want to be dealing with
I mean,
contracts. No.
Plus, in Florida,
craziness.
transactional brokerage where the agent's not representing
There's
either
no
party.
fiduciary.
That's-
It
no.
blows
That's how,
my
in
mind.
And
Pennsylvania,
California is
where I
pretty
started,
simple. Right.
Where I started, it was like that.
Yeah.
It was writing your own contracts.
Yeah.
But I'll mention something about Pennsylvania. Like, I started 16 years ago, and when I did first get licensed, they trained us to sit down, hey, come into my office, let's grab coffee. Here's my consumer information statement. Here's what the agency relationship is. Here's what I charge, blah, blah, blah. It was just always paid by the seller. But you still had that conversation. I remember moving up to the city and being like, whoa, this is like the Wild West. And that was, everything from 2008, 9. It was like, you don't talk about it. You just kind of go. You go show the home, and then it's just understood you're going to get paid. But this is
that's the
taking
thing.
it back.
It's understood that you're going to get paid. So my question always is, and then I'm hearing this, people are asking me this, what then becomes the value proposition? And I keep saying the value, proposition being asked by your buyer to you is, you've got to learn how to better communicate, better negotiate. You've got to give them the reasons why, as Michael said before, this is what I do. This is what my expertise is, and this is how I'm going to help you get through this transaction, right?
I'm sure you're going to use that as an example so many times, sitting with buyers, going through it. Look, let me show you an example of how I saved this person.
And we have teams. We have teams that we refer lawyers, attorneys, we refer mortgage bankers, we refer, whatever, interior decorators when necessary. We work, as groups of people, real estate advisor, thank you, to give you the best served service that we can give you. Richard, I understand that you have a new website coming out. Tell us about that quickly, and what is it going to do by way of all these changes we've been talking about?
Sure. So we recognize there's got to be multiple ways that people learn. So we have to figure out how we can take advantage of all those different ways people learn, distill them into one location, one site. It's a corporate site. We're incorporating a knowledge base into that site. So if they have a question about any of our products, we have a product called Cubicasa. You walk around the room, the whole layout of the apartment with your phone. Within 3 minutes, you have a floor plan with square footage. So we want to develop that resource that agents can go to regardless of their question. And we want to supplement it. I mean, Pierre's been involved in an endeavor to really create great learning more along the lines of continuing ed. We're not interested in that at all. We're interested in product, in tools, in helping show the agents how those tools can help them succeed, help them make more money, help them have better relationships with their clients. I don't think such a thing really exists so far in terms of something that's really easy to use And our goal is also to have this be really super easy to find stuff. How often do you go on a website? It takes you a half hour. I mean, it keeps you sending it to documents that existed 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So our whole focus with this new website is ease of use, giving you the information, the knowledge you need when you need it.
Closing remarks.
All right, if you give me
On the spot.
I will say this: any real estate agents, brokers out there, we did just launch, in the city pretty recently, but we are looking for good agents. So if I could just make that plug out there right now to, full-on training, guidance for what we're dealing with right now, and lead generation and just teaching and training.
Quick question: when you're interviewing for new agents, whether they're here or in New Jersey or any of your offices, are they agents asking about the settlement, or it's not coming up?
They've heard about it, but they don't really know what's going on. So, they're going to really need, if it wasn't a bad enough fail rate ratio before, it's probably going to be 90% now from a new licensee. So you really do need that guidance, training, and knowledge of how to speak to the consumer, or it's going to be hard.
I get it. Michael, closing remarks, thoughts?
Well, I just think that to agents out there, take a deep breath. Most companies are putting out really good education and training out there. The MLSs, everybody else has them. The tools that they have are incredible. I'm always blown away by some of the tools the MLSs have.
It's amazing.
So I think it's awesome that you're kind of combining that within a resource for agents to have. But I think they, it's going to make you better agents. You're going to do more role playing now in situations. You're going to try and think about what are some of the biggest objections I'm going to have? How can I think outside the box in my value proposition? How can I communicate it more effectively? So I think it's going to make you better agents. And also, I think it's going to weed out I think it's going to weed out some competition as agents, like people that are just getting their license and they just like, oh yeah, hey, look, I have my license. It really just becomes aware as a buyer just to say like, oh, I feel like I'm signing a contract to hire this person. Like, are they really qualified to represent me here? Like, it really makes them kind of think about things and puts things in perspective. So I think it's going to make people better agents. I don't think really there's going to be so much change. Everybody has a lot of fear because people have fear anyways, regardless of change. So either be good, bad, or up for discussion, right? Like, I know some people that hate change so much that God could touch them on the head and say, go this way. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, they're scared. So big concern. I get it. I understand it. I think it's all going to smooth out and it's going to be fine. I think this was a very sly way for someone to make $400 million during this lawsuit, but I personally don't think much is going to change. We'll have our hurdles, but I think we're going to get through it. So
I do agree with that. Pierre, take this conversation home.
So I think, New York, we're in a lot better boat than the rest of the country. And a lot of the reason for that is that 70% of our inventory is co-ops. I think here, for the most part, it will be business as usual. Right. In the next 6 months, is going to be a big transition. Like, our law practice, our residential practice is focused on New York City and the Hamptons. Those are two of the most major markets in the world. When you look at both markets, you're dealing with some of the sophisticated, affluent, successful people in the world. They're not going to have the patience to deal with buyers coming in, lowballing them, coming in unrepresented, not knowing what they're doing, having, all these ridiculous negotiation terms. They're going to want somebody that's there, that's represented by a professional, that gets a deal done. Now, I think the narrative is going to be a lot different than the rest of the country. The rest of the country, an agent's role is different, and the price points and level of affluency is different. And I think buyers, agents in rural America, you're going to see a huge drop in number of agents. But I think in our market in New York, like Mike said, we'll weed out some fat. All in all, I think it'll be business as usual.
All right, we're coming back with my thoughts for the week, but Richard, Kyle, Michael, Pierre, the brain power in this room, and having to sit here with them and have a conversation is extraordinary. Don't go anywhere. Okay, everybody, we are back with my thoughts of this week, and quite a conversation we just had. In the ever-evolving real estate world, change is inevitable, and when shifts occur, whether due to market dynamics, legal developments, or economic fluctuations, agents must be adaptable to maintain their success. The ability to pivot and embrace new strategies is crucial, and regulations and industry practices evolve. For instance, significant legal rulings like we just talked about today, the National Association of Realtors commission settlement lawsuit can reshape how transactions are conducted and how commissions are negotiated. In these times, real estate agents must stay informed, adjust their approach, and effectively communicate these changes to their clients. Adaptability not only ensures compliance with new standards, but also allows agents to continue providing valuable guidance to clients, navigating the complexities of the real estate market here. By remaining flexible and proactive, agents can turn challenge into opportunities, positioning themselves as trusted advisors in an industry where the only constant really is change. And that's our broadcast for today. Thanks to my guests for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, or TikTok at Vince Rocco, or on my website, thinkvince.com. Norman Vincent Peale says, shoot for the moon, everyone. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you all around the world, we are grateful. Thanks for spending a part of your day with us, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.